So if we're going to go down the path of gaming, understanding that we will have to expand those programs, just keep in mind, that's the reality. I'm not sure we can afford it. So we're looking at this budget shortfall. We're hearing Republican-ish legislators and Democratic legislators talking about the need to bring in new revenues, more taxes, or even new things like gambling, gaming. You have to be careful of those. But the real problem with spending, and the thing that we can do to solve our budget problem, is the thing that is the most difficult, and that is controlling actually the spending. We have to make sure that Irwin Cain and all of his colleagues know that we expect them to fix the budget by controlling the spending. And that's the second issue I'll touch really very briefly on, is the spending problem that we have in the state of Texas. Again, I mentioned a third of the budget are these health care things, Medicaid primarily, and CHIP. Now, if President Obama has his way and Obamacare continues to live, which let's all hope and pray that Greg Abbott's lawsuit continues and is successful, Obamacare will cost the state of Texas something like $27 billion. If you think that and that's money we don't have, those are unfunded mandates from Washington, in the neighborhood of $27 billion over the next couple of years. We can't afford it. We have to start now making the right kinds of cuts in spending to prepare for the possibility that we may be burdened with Obamacare in the state budget. We can't hope that Greg Abbott's lawsuit is successful. We have to plan as a state the way you and I plan as individuals, which is for the worst possible scenario. That's how the Sullivan family budgets. I'm sure that's how all of your families budget too. You budget for the car breaking down every week. You budget for the plumbing going out. You budget for all those things, and you're happy when they don't happen. But you have to budget for it. And so I would suggest to you that we have to make sure that the legislature is budgeting correctly, considering this massive unfunded liability that is, at this moment, the law of the land, and at this moment is going to be an unfunded liability for the state of Texas. That's number one. So where do we cut that spending? Where do we attack the spending? Again, I mentioned that 2/3 of the state budget can be summed up in Medicaid, CHIP, and public education and higher education. Public education is pre-K to 12. Higher education is anything after high school. 2-year community colleges, which really don't get very much money from the state, and then our 4-year institutions of alleged higher education. That's where you really have to begin looking at ways to save money, or in that area. Again, eliminate the Commission on the Arts. I'll be the first one there with you. That's a couple $100,000. Next, eliminate the Transportation Department. Okay, we won't do roads in Texas. That's fine. That's $1 billion. Next. I mean, you really can only nickel and dime so far. And I would argue that transportation is a legitimate role of government. I'm not sure that Obamacare is legitimate. So we need to make sure we're not cutting off our nose to spite our face. We should look at the most sacred of cows, and that is, of course, public education. Right now, in Texas, we spend $11,084 per child per year in our public schools. That's according to numbers supplied by the school districts to the Texas Education Agency. Go to the TEA website, look at their snapshots publication, you can find that data. $11,084 per year per child in public education. We have doubled public education spending since 1999 to 2009, and yet our SAT scores in the state have remained completely flat. The only thing that's gotten bigger, besides the budget, has been the dropout rate, which I think you don't want to have happen. I think you want to go the other way with that. We're spending lots of money with no discernible impact on our students. The reason we do public education, allegedly, is to educate children. I would contend that modern public education is less about educating kids and more about employing adults. I'm absolutely convinced of it when I look at the numbers. The numbers show that since 1999, student enrollment in Texas has increased 16%. The number of teachers on the payroll has increased 19%, which actually makes sense when you have to figure class size changes and demographic changes. That's a correct number. The number of non-teachers on the public school payroll since 1999 has increased 22%. Some of those people are necessary. Pretty certain a lot of them aren't. When you look at the ratio of non-teacher to teacher on the public school payroll, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. 1 teacher to 1 non-teacher on the public school payroll. That's not sustainable. The best of private schools, you have something like a 3 to 4 teacher per non-teacher on their payroll. They somehow manage to get by with less overhead. Now, is it the school's fault? Sure. Find your school board member and beat them. That's fine. Find your superintendent, slap them about the head and shoulders, which is actually probably a pretty good recommendation. But I would suggest to you that the real problem in education spending is the people that you and I look at when we look in the mirror in the morning. You and I demand so many things out of public education that are simply not in line with providing for an education. I was in Switzerland a couple of years ago for a monetary policy conference. If you find yourself having to go to a monetary policy conference, I encourage you to do it in Switzerland. You can be bored there better than anywhere else on the planet. I'm absolutely convinced of it. But we were traveling from Bern, which is their national capital, to Geneva, which is kind of the financial capital. We're going in these little European buses that frankly terrify me anytime I look at one of them. We're sitting in the bus, and I'm doing everything I can to not be scared by this tiny little thing made out of, paper or whatever it was. Driving along, one little town, all these kids are flowing out of a classroom. It's middle of the day, noonish. Next little town, all the kids are out in the streets. Finally, we were out kind of in the middle of nowhere, and there's this one little kid, 9, 10 years old, with a backpack on his back. And I said to the Swiss gentleman next to me on the bus, what's going on? I mean, it's a Thursday, and it's noon. Where are all the kids going? Some kind of half day? Holiday? What's going on? And he looked at his watch. He said, oh, it's lunchtime. I said, yes, it's lunchtime. Where are all the kids going? He said, well, lunch. And I looked at him, and I said, you mean your kids don't have lunch at school? And he stared at me perplexed, and he said, you mean in the United States, kids eat lunch at school? And I said, well, of course. I mean, here, I'm a right-wing nut. And I say to him, what do you do about kids who can't afford lunch, whose parents can't provide lunch for them? And this fellow, who I'd come to realize was perhaps the most pro-American European I'd ever met, he looked just devastated, because what I had just communicated to him was that there were people in the United States, there were so many people in the United States who were so poor, his words, that they can't even get 2 pieces of bread and some ham to send their kids to school with. I mean, he was just shocked and mortified by this. I said, well, what do your kids do for lunch here then? Well, they close down the building, the teachers go have lunch, the kids go have lunch, they meet back at 1 o'clock. I mean, it's very simple. And I chewed on this for months, this conversation. Now, 3, 4 years later, I'm still chewing on this conversation of all the things that you and I expect our public schools to do. We expect them to feed Johnny, not just at lunch, but in most school districts, breakfast. In urban areas, you can also sign your kid up to get a little box to take home for dinner. In most urban areas now, anyone can actually show up at the school and get a free lunch and then that free box dinner, whether you're a student or not. We ask our schools to make sure Johnny has high self-esteem. We want Johnny to be entertained during the day with movies, because he certainly can't be troubled to learn for too many hours during the day. We want the community to be educated. Now, I should make a quick disclaimer here. My dad was an itinerant priest in the state religion of high school football. We travel the state. He is a head coach in more school districts than I can count when I was a kid. But we ask our schools to provide facilities for the entertainment of the community. Friday nights are good in the fall. Tuesdays and Thursdays are preferable in the spring. Facilities that rival colleges just a couple of years ago. It's amazing the amount of cash that we ask to be spent in public education that has nothing to do with the reason that our state constitution says that we do public education.